You're watching Natural Solutions for Your Allergies by Dr. Alyssa Gall on Resonance Wellness TV, part of our Whole Life Medicine Alleviate series. Keep in the loop about future webinars and events on whole-life-medicine.com. Welcome to Natural Solutions for Your Allergies. So our lecture tonight is going to focus on points from the perspective of Alleviate from the Whole Life Medicine model, which is the first step in health strategy or health at Resonance Wellness. I'm not sure if everybody has seen this model quite yet. Sometimes I've talked to certain individuals about it, and then other times I don't get the chance to because we don't always have time. But in essence, a couple of years ago, we put together a model of how do we actually take a look at health and how do we do the beginning rescue steps, which is basically Alleviate. That's like a foundational rescue. And then how do we kind of get deeper from there? So if we look at Alleviate, it's the first step in my approach to patient guidance. And we're going to look at the topic of allergies from this perspective tonight. In short, there's three considerations when we're looking at strategies to resolve a health issue at this level. The first is to consider what are the root causes of an allergic situation. So we got to ask ourselves, what's the setup? There's some obvious things that we're going to discuss, of course, like being exposed to an allergen. But there's also some underlying factors that people experience that can strongly contribute to allergy. The second piece is to look at the state of the tissues involved. So in the clean slate process, we look at how to improve the cleaning up of the tissues, in this case, your upper respiratory tract and your eyes and your lungs that get bogged down in the allergy process. The third is to look at possible missing ingredients that can affect your ability to calm down an allergic reaction. So with those thoughts in mind, we're just going to dive right in. And we're going to do this every seminar. We're going to kind of come back a little bit to this model because what I've really noticed about my patients, and I'm pretty sure it includes everybody on this call, I've really noticed that, we always do foundational rescue things first, and then over time, the questions get a little bit more complex, not because, those things are not cleaned up, but because as you get really good at foundational rescue, questions about why something's happened or what your tendencies are constitutionally or genetically start to come up, and then long term, it's always questions about life purpose, which are hopefully not going to be involved in allergies tonight, but you just never know. So let's take a look at what is an allergy. So seasonal allergies are basically called hay fever, or sometimes it's been termed allergic rhinitis. Now, this is a specific symptom, of course, of the inside of the nose, but often those terms are used interchangeably. And obviously, it's symptoms that manifest during specific times of the year when we say seasonal allergy. So symptoms of seasonal allergies are itchy, watery eyes, runny nose, hives, sneezing. We're going to look at a more comprehensive list in a sec, but seasonal allergies develop when the body's immune system becomes sensitized and overreacts to something in the environment. The symptoms of seasonal allergy a person develops often depends on what's causing the immune reaction. And allergens can be inhaled, so you can actually breathe them in and have contact with a membrane. You can ingest them, so you can eat them or have it on your hand or skin and ingest it by accident, or you can come into skin contact. So it's important to note that the symptoms that you have are usually normal parts of the immune response. They're just taken up a few notches. So it's not really due to a weakness in the immune system, but rather confusion in the immune system. And we're going to be a bit more specific about that in a sec. So let's look at some of the leading causes of symptoms. So any number of symptoms can be created by allergies. The most common, like we already mentioned, runny, stuffy nose, sneezing, can be wheezing or shortness of breath, cough, rash, hives, fatigue, headaches can often come from allergy, nausea and vomiting, excess mucus, obviously that's a common one with seasonal allergies, watery, itchy eyes, and itchy throat. And they don't all have to occur together. Sometimes there'll just be one symptom, and it's like a one troubling symptom. You don't have the full classic seasonal allergy, but you'll have one other thing that's more specific to you. Other symptoms can also occur that are not as obvious, such as decreased concentration and focus, being fatigued, or having a sleep disorder, mood swings, irritability. There's a number of aggravations and conditions that can happen with seasonal allergies. If you have asthma or eczema or are prone to ear infections or kids are prone to ear infections, sometimes seasonal allergies can actually really ramp those symptoms up. So what actually is causing it? That's the million-dollar question. Some people experience allergies seasonally and it's really marked. You have these allergies and they happen in June. Other people have allergies and they're happening all the season long, or sometimes people will only notice it at certain times of the winter. Now, that's not exactly seasonal allergy, but you can still have like inhalant allergies that will pop up in winter. So it's not always easy to pinpoint the cause, especially if it's a little bit less clearly delineated. But there's the most common contributors to this kind of allergy symptom includes pollen. So pollen from trees and plants and grass. And pollen is basically a fine powder that comes out of the flowering plants. Pollen is really a plant's only form of reproduction. So it's produced in huge quantities. Pollens are spread by wind. They're carried by insects. They can really travel long distances. So even if you don't have a particular kind of tree in your yard, that doesn't always make it better. Sometimes it makes it worse if you actually have a tree outside your window. I've definitely seen that before. But levels of pollen in the air can really vary. They vary from day to day. They can vary hour to hour because of the wind conditions. There's different pollens for each pollen season. So at present, it's late May in Calgary, and the grass, including Timothy, grass is pollinating, and birch trees are pollinating, pine, fir, spruce, alder, and ash pollens. You're already seeing those pollens at this time in the year. And grass is going to continue pollinating all the way through June. So if your allergies are more likely to be towards late summer and fall, weeds are more typically your culprit. The weeds, only certain weeds have kind of gotten going now, but the biggest and most common weed pollen quantity in later summer is going to be ragweed. It's a very common allergen. You can also have allergies to dust and dust mites. So these are present all year round, but they can really vary inside depending on how airtight a house is and whether or not there's any air filtration. Alberta has huge interior particulate counts most of the time due to low humidity. I mean, all of us kind of have the token humidifier on our furnace, but I don't know about you guys, but my humidifier just never seems like, you could basically, you might as well pour bathtub water through your house. It's still not going to really make a huge dent in it, unless you have a more airtight house or, probably a newer system than in my house. But it really makes a huge difference to have higher humidity if you have inhalant allergies, because the humidity in the air will actually capture the pollen or dusty particles, because pollen is like a dusty particle as well, and so is dust and all those interior allergens, and it makes it fall to the ground. So if your humidity is good and you do a good job of vacuuming and like wiping up dust, you can actually really reduce allergies that way. Animal fur and dander are kind of in that category as well. Obviously, a little bit more concentrated typically in the house if you have house pets. Mold can still be an issue here, even with the dryness. It's mostly due to plumbing issues, and foundational issues to your house. That can really be an instigator to a year-round allergy. So if it seems like you're having this allergy and it's pretty consistent all year round, sometimes it's worth getting your bathroom mold. And like I said, you'd think it'd be too dry here for that to really exist, but there's been a handful of cases again that we've seen in Calgary where people just have horrible mold problems in their house and they're totally not aware until they open up the wall, or they open up the wall behind the tub enclosure or something if they're doing a renovation and realize there's a huge amount of mold in there. And once you clean that out, and you have to have somebody come to your house and clean it out properly. Once you clean that out, it can make a huge difference. Insect bites and stings are really common seasonal allergy triggers. Latex, obviously not just seasonal, but the kind used to make latex gloves or condoms, that can really create seasonal type allergy symptoms. And, various foods can actually contribute. And we're going to talk about this here in just a minute. But before we do that, let's take a look at testing. This is a very common question in my practice, like, can we test what kind of allergies I have? Lab testing is available. So you can determine how significant a response you're having to both environmental and food allergens by blood testing. So the test used for the symptoms that you see with seasonal allergies is called an IgE test. This tests for a type of antibody that makes histamine-triggered reactions. So these antibodies, the IgE, are produced by white blood cells in response to an allergen. So when you take this kind of blood test, it can really help narrow down which environmental allergen is triggering you. And you can also use this particular kind of test to show foods that you could have an anaphylactic reaction to. Now, this is a little bit different than the other kind of food testing that you might be familiar with, which is IgG testing. And many of you may have had that kind of testing in our office for food sensitivities. It's a different antibody, and it's used for a delayed hypersensitivity response for foods. So we don't test inhalants that way. We test for a different immunoglobulin. A common test that's used by allergists in town is the scratch test. So this is when you have a known antigen scratched into the top layer of your skin, and the allergist is measuring a red swollen response to ascertain whether or not you have the allergy. And so they usually rank it kind of between a 1 to a 4. And really, it's not a very technical test because you're basically looking at bumps. So if people get scratch testing and 1 or 2 things show up, that's great because that really narrows it down. It's not too complicated. Usually there's some strategies you can use to reduce allergen exposure and do some other things that just clean that up. But sometimes people get scratch testing and there's literally every single wheel is coming up. And if you're in that category, it doesn't typically mean that you're like truly allergic to all of those things. What that's usually telling us is there's something going on in the background, that we have to dig a little bit deeper. And it's not just about identifying the allergen, but it's actually also about identifying one of those processes that's not going very well that we're going to talk about as we go along here today. So we can also do ART testing for allergies of all types, kind of into a ballpark way. In the office, we only have certain kinds of allergic samples because otherwise we could just test them forever. So we can usually narrow it down, what category it actually is. And so there's, like I said, it's not the same as doing IgE quantification, which is what you're getting with the blood test. But it can help ballpark things down. And it's a lot cheaper option because some of those tests get run into the hundreds and hundreds of dollars. Okay, so as I said before, foods really can contribute to this situation. And you wouldn't think of that way, but there's a couple of different categories that we can see contributing. So it's not unusual to see a food sensitivity producing similar symptoms to a seasonal allergy, or creating symptoms that are even more anaphylactic in nature. We've definitely seen those, like peanut anaphylaxis is a great example of that. But there's also foods that can be aggravating to a seasonal allergy situation without creating anaphylaxis, either using IgG as an immunoglobulin response. So the most common food sensitivities in that category are things like wheat and dairy, soy, corn, and egg. And when the immune system is already occupied with things that it finds challenging, seasonal type allergies can be aggravated. You just don't have unlimited reserve. So if you're spending a lot of time ingesting something that's already stressing out the immune system, you'd be surprised how trigger happy you can actually get. And this is it starts to account for when you're really having difficulty figuring out why you're having that response. Because unfortunately, your body is not very black and white. It likes to do things kind of in a complex way. And so if you're stressed, it's like if, you already know if you're stressed out and you add one more stressor to it, sometimes it's just the straw that broke the camel's back. And all those things were there before, but now they're there more markedly. Now, simple sugars and alcohol can aggravate allergy. Just again, because it actually does weaken the immune system to have simple sugars like that. And it changes the responsiveness of white blood cells. So sometimes they just start doing weird things when there's too much of a sugar load, and it's a big stressor on the body as well. The other category is processed foods, things that have like MSG or preservatives, like colors, artificial sweeteners. That can also make things worse. And if you have a high load of that, you can also be a little bit more trigger happy. Foods, there are foods that contain high amounts of molds, and that can really aggravate somebody with a mold allergy season, and it will appear to be seasonal, like melons, mango, banana, oranges, grapes. It depends on, what people are eating at their house. You can also accidentally be eating fruits relating to a pollen you're sensitive to. This creates something that's known as oral allergy syndrome. So as an example, if you're sensitive to birch pollen, then raw apples can cause problems. And there's like a whole bunch of lists. And if you ever get swelling, especially around the mouth, when you're ingesting certain things, or you get that with your seasonal allergies, it could actually be that the presence of the pollen in the air and you ingesting that thing create the problem. Now, at some point, if there's an interest, I'll re-record the food allergies lecture that goes into way more detail about sensitivities that are more digestive based. And we talk a lot more about these more IgG and other kinds of immunoglobulin reactions that you can actually have, because there's a whole range of them. But that is a topic for another day. I could talk for at least an hour about that. And I'm trying to be efficient today. So next, we're going to take a look at, the fact that there can be an insult to the immune system that's really likely the underlying cause of allergies. And this picture here is like glow-in-the-dark bacteria. It's such a cool microbiome picture. Lots of people have heard about microbiome issues now, but your body is a highly connected set of systems, and conditions that affect the immune system can result in increased allergies. So a huge factor is a change in the gut microflora. So the gut microflora is a community of microorganisms that colonize your gut wall, where the majority of your immune system is really residing all the way through your gut wall. There's more immune tissue in your gut than in the rest of your body combined. So the balance of the gut flora affects the overall immune-mediated inflammatory pathways in the body. And when gut microflora are balanced and the immune system is working as it should, the body should be able to distinguish between safe environmental particles and unsafe environmental particles. So when the gut microflora gets imbalanced, though, the immune system can really be oversensitive to substances it shouldn't. And this can really contribute to seasonal allergies and other conditions, obviously, that involve the immune system, like autoimmune conditions and chronic inflammatory conditions. The gut flora are also very affected by antibiotic use. So this can really change the microflora by early childhood exposures to various things, whether it's, whether or not a child was breastfed, exposure to poor quality foods, genetically modified foods. These are all pieces of information that are feeding directly into your microflora system, and they really change the populations and the balance there. Prevention of childhood diseases by vaccination can also have an impact on the long-term immune health. And that seems counterintuitive, but if your immune system doesn't have a chance to kind of practice acute inflammatory reactions in a predictable way in childhood, and we have a tendency to interfere with those processes, I think, sometimes a little bit too early. But it's been shown that if there's too many vaccinations and too many antibiotics, children and adults are way more vulnerable to allergies. It can be about a 4 times level of having an allergy between kids that are vaccinated and not, as an example. So 40% of vaccinated children can usually report at least one allergy, but only 10 will typically report the same amount of allergy. So it's a huge thing. So and the main reason for that is the same reason for why we're looking at the microflora. Overstimulate the Th2 branch of the adapted immune system, and it creates a kind of hyperinflammatory condition. And that state, combined with an exposure, can sometimes trigger something. Now, that's like not a do or die situation. Even if you have that situation in the past, or there's been plenty of vaccines, we have more vaccines now than I certainly was vaccinated with when I was a child, but you can always mitigate how your immune system is responding. That's a little bit more complex of a condition, but I want you to be aware of it. If something happened like that, if you notice it in your child after antibiotic exposure or after a vaccination. So basically, we're going to start taking a look at some solutions, and we're going to start with some simple ones. Although you guys know me, I'm not always, I like exhaustive lists of things. So let's take a look at something just obvious. So if you have a distinct pollen season, then you're going to look for a natural allergy relief, not relying on pharmaceuticals. You can devise strategies to minimize your exposure to an allergen. So strategies like this include monitoring your pollen and mold accounts. Weather reports will often include this information. Like you can get this information on the Weather Channel or for Environment Canada. They'll tell you in your location what the current pollen counts are like. And if you limit your outside exposure, pollen counts are highest from 5 to 10 a.m. So really in the morning, and also very high around dusk. There's not as much active pollen secretion going on in the middle of the day. If you can, keep your windows and doors shut and the fan running with a filter. And even in your car during allergy season, like we were talking about before, if you can increase the humidity, that's a great idea. And if you run air conditioning, you'll actually remove a lot of particulate out of the air. That was really brought home to me. I guess it would have been, was it last year where all the smoke, or year before last, where we had such intense smoke? And I was running air conditioners in my house, and I was actually hugely surprised. I couldn't actually smell the smoke in my house with those running because they were so good at pulling it out. Because in essence, they work by pulling out humidity. And so if there were any pieces of smoke on the drops of water in the air, they were getting sucked right out. So I could literally not tell that there was smoke outside. But if I went outside, it was just overwhelming. So incredibly useful to decrease that. Change and wash your clothes. You know, that if you go outside and you're working, you're playing outside, your kids are working, playing outside, bring those clothes in and throw them like right in the washer. Remember that your pets are exposed to pollen when they're outside. So you can't wash your pet every time, but, you know, be mindful of that. If your pollen counts are high, don't put your clothes out on the line. There's nothing nicer than air dried in the sun clothes, but that really does tend to inundate them with pollen. And if you are doing things like mowing lawns or doing outdoor chores or something like that, you can just wear some protective stuff. And it really comes down to it, you know, wear a dust mask. Better like that than feeling like you're just overwhelmed with pollen, especially if you haven't managed to get it under control. Although we're going to talk about some things next where we're really going to have a chance to talk about ways that you can be a little bit more interventive. So my first and most favorite, and all of you will know this, is being well hydrated. Now, I've written this down here as both like a clean slate process, because it's really part of how you create the best tissue conditions by detoxification, and also as a potential missing ingredient, because so many people don't do a great job of hydration. So it really is the most fundamental part of clean slate processes. And it's your mucous membranes are really supposed to have this constant discharge and movement of protective mucus. And when mucus doesn't flow well, histamine reactions are more likely. And histamine reactions, like where your white bloods are like pumping out histamine in their immediate area, they're self-perpetuating. So once you start one, it's very, very hard to terminate it quickly unless you catch it really quickly, which most of us don't. And part of that is just because every time histamine molecules come in contact with other white blood cells, those white blood cells are going to degranulate their histamine too. So it becomes like a little bit of a whoosh wave. And you often will see it kind of going up and down in waves. Even if you're doing all the right things and you're creating some resolving, sometimes you'll see this kind of up, down towards the down as you're over time. So one of the reasons why hydration really helps this is you're really creating great flow through an area, and you really need to have enough water available to do that. Keeping a good flow of mucus that's trapping the particulates so it moves quickly through your head and it's swallowed really helps reduce severity of reactions. You're just moving the histamines more quickly off the contact area, and you're moving things away properly through the tissue itself. So it's kind of like if you have a bit of a SLU condition, you're just not moving the histamine out, and it can get to the point where it's just going around in circles so much, and you have such an inflamed tissue that even if you put the very best antihistamines in there, you're really not going to dent it, or you're not going to dent it for long. And when you have those kind of conditions, then you really know it's one of those basic things you really got to pay attention to. So that's my plug for water. As you all know, I do that almost every time I talk to most of you. So next things are, we can really look at dietary strategies to reduce allergic symptoms. And in general, there's kind of a few common missing ingredient foods that can help a lot. They're just common sense things that can really improve any diet. You know, one we've already talked about, just avoid any known sensitivities more completely during allergy season. Include whole grains instead of processed ones. Eat tons of dark leafy vegetables. Include some like flax oil or similar kind of oils to reduce inflammatory reactions. Most people are pretty deficient in those. And you only really need the equivalent of probably about a fat tablespoon every day to help that. Eat some oily fish, cods, herrings, mackerel, salmon, sardines. You're going to get a lot of EPA, which is a kind of omega-3 fatty acid out of that. And that's typically in most people pretty anti-inflammatory. Not everybody, but most people. Spirulina also has a certain amount of EPA, and just by itself, that actually can help allergies by taking spirulina. That's the blue-green algae. It's often used in lots of green drinks. Using anti-inflammatory enzymes like pineapple contains bromelain or papaya, that can really reduce allergy symptoms by keeping the respiratory linings less swollen. You can also have lots of turmeric if you don't mind curries. That actually contains some quercetin, and we're going to talk about quercetin in a capsule form in a moment. But as a food, you can use turmeric, and bone broth will often help to break up mucus, and it can decrease a fair amount of inflammation in the body, and that can actually bring some relief to allergy symptoms as well. So aside from your diet, there are a definite handful of supplements that are key to naturally increasing or decreasing allergy symptoms. So there are a handful that can be used just like missing ingredients. So EMIQ is my personal favorite. EMIQ is a concentrated preparation from quercetin. So quercetin is a bioflavonoid that really significantly reduces histamine release. It's super useful in those times where allergy symptoms in Calgary have been terrible, and it really works quite well at a low dose. It only usually takes 1 or 2 of them to really do it, even when people are just having some brutal reactions. And I think it was last year in the spring, summer, we had probably some of the most intense seasonal allergy symptoms that I'd seen in quite a long time. And most people responded really well to be more functional with EMIQ. Vitamin C, most people have heard about using vitamin C, I'm sure, for allergies. It does also prevent the formation of histamine if you take several grams of it per day. To be most efficient, probably by itself, it's going to have to be used to bowel tolerance. That's where you take it until you're just shy of diarrhea. Because vitamin C, if you take enough of it, you can't absorb all of it. And so it goes out in the stool, and it's a bit of a laxative. It's not a dangerous effect. It just, you don't want to be having diarrhea all the time. But the average person can tolerate between 5 to 10 grams as an adult. With kids, it's a little bit less than that, usually about approximate to body weight. Probiotics. As we spoke about before, the microbiome is a crucial piece of immune function. And taking specific kinds of probiotics can really help with decreasing allergies. I tend to use HMF Immune. So this is a professional probiotic by Soroil. If you're looking for it, we usually have some of that in the fridge, in the dispensary, which are more particular to the respiratory tract immunity. You can use other forms of probiotics as well. I don't have experience with all the lines of probiotics. I just usually tend to stick to the ones that I know really work well. So there's a ton of probiotics that you can get nowadays. It actually astounds me how many lines of probiotics you can get. And there's different strains for this and that. But like I said, what you're wanting is one that clinically is really useful, and that one is definitely useful. Last but not least, we've already talked about this in a food context, but you can use a high omega-3 oil to reduce inflammation in people with really chronic allergies. You can use a much more concentrated version of that. In office, we use SPM Active. That's like distilling about 5 gallons of fish oil into this tiny capsule for pretty much the most potent anti-inflammatory components. They're expensive, but if you're feeling like really overwhelmed with inflammation, they work really well. But if you don't have that much, you can definitely get away with using Super EFA oil. Now, you wouldn't think this, but in reality, if you're suffering from allergies, you might not think about getting up and going for exercise, but exercise can actually help a lot with allergy symptoms, as long as you're not running through a field of pollen. I mean, to be clear. And in essence, what you're doing is you're improving blood flow. So here, this is another clean slate process. Every time we increase blood flow, we get you up and off the couch and moving a lot, you're just improving the removal of allergens and the clearance of reactive byproducts in your body. You can't exercise away your allergies, but you can certainly minimize your symptoms, because, you know, all that blood flow is really going to prevent the delicate tissues in your mouth and lungs and nose from being as inflamed. So it doesn't have to be intense or challenging. You know, you don't have to run up a mountain. All you just need to do is get your blood pumping. It's also really great for calming your stress gland or adrenal gland. And when you support your stress gland, it really helps these kind of inflammatory symptoms. It's not uncommon. I would almost expect most people with adrenal low function, or just unsupported adrenal function or too much stress, to be more prone to seasonal allergies. It's a very common. In essence, what your adrenal produces for you is a set of anti-inflammatory compounds. And some of them are the ones that you know well as things that we use to make allergic reactions go away, like, you know, cortisone cream and like steroid inhalers for asthma. So if that gland is not supported and it's not doing that naturally within you, we often use like literally the compounds out of the adrenal gland. So if you tend to stress, your seasonal allergies are going to be worse. So if you know that about yourself, supporting your adrenal is a great idea. But one of those ways that you can do that is literally to go exercise. Also good for other things, of course. Now, you can also do some pretty simple topical acupressure techniques. Now, I sent you a little link to a video that showed some acupuncture techniques. And on this diagram, I actually marked it with an X, as close as I can get. So usually when you have seasonal allergies, you're going to know that these points are tender. So when you use acupressure, you're basically also improving circulation, and you're stimulating the nervous system in the skin, which is the part of the nervous system that takes care of all the flow, signals all the flow, and you can actually stimulate that to drain better. So if you use good pressure and you get right up underneath the inside bottom edge of your eyebrow, and you stimulate and hold that for about 3 minutes at a time. And then the other ones that are really great are the ones just on either side of your nose, where at the nostril level. And normally they're very tender spots when you're seasonally allergic. If you can do that, 6 minutes of pressing in those two spots can actually really improve just the sinus pressure feeling. And so it's relatively immediate. You can also do the one that's in the interweb space between your thumb and index finger. A lot of the time people will really feel the ball that collects in there when the sinus pressure is great. Don't forget, though, if you're really struggling with sinus pressure, you should volunteer for neural therapy, which, of course, is that surface injection technique that we use. If you feel like your head's going to blow off, that's the fastest way of changing it. But in the interim, if you can't get in or you're too scared of needles, you can certainly use acupressure techniques on some of these points. Now, another thing I'm asked about a lot is a neti pot, and neti pots are great if you use them judiciously. So basically what you're doing with a neti pot, and this is obviously not a picture of a neti pot, sorry, I couldn't find a really great one, but rinsing the linings of your nasal passages with a kind of bottle can be achieved with a neti pot. And so that's actually an Ayurvedic therapy that historically you're using salt water to rinse inside the nose. Actually, Ayurvedically, we also use different kinds of essential oils and different herbal rinses, but people get a little freaked out about putting like herbal rinses up their nose. So salt water is more than proficient. The inside of the nose has this huge area. Like if you basically put your 2 index fingers and your 2 thumbs together and made a triangle, that's probably approximately how big your nose inner surface is, and you have 4 surfaces that size. And not only that, but you also have these turbinates in there that increase surface area that actually are responsible for whipping the air around in your nose, so that particulate you inhale is actually like by G-forces slammed against the mucous membranes to trap it. And so they're huge surfaces. And so when you neti pot and things are like all bogged up in there, you can often gently rinse a lot of those things away. And if your hydration has been poor, this works also particularly well. But you really don't want to overdo this, because if you overdo neti pot, you will notice that it actually irritates the surfaces a little bit. Normally, people really shouldn't do this more than once, maybe twice in a day, if you're really stuffed up and you need to get stuff out. You can also get the thing like, so the original neti pot kind of looks a little bit more like a little teapot, but you can get one nowadays at the drugstore, and there's one brand name that's called Neil Med, and it's more of a squeezy bottle, so you can squeeze the bottle instead of having to like angle your head, and you get a fairly good volume up through there, and it usually comes with little salt packets in it. So that's another option. But rinsing gently, great idea. If you find, though, that that aggravates you, what that usually means is that the apertures to your sinus cavities are swollen enough that you're either trapping water in there. If you use too much force, you can trap some water in your sinuses by pressure. It doesn't feel very good. So again, another opportunity for neural therapy. Go figure. But gentle counts. Oh, I wanted to show you the inside of the nose so you can kind of see how huge that is. So this is just showing on that top left the number of surfaces, or the size of the surface. It's just a huge amount of your head, really. And also that there's a number of different sinus cavities that are literally attached by tubes or holes to the inside of your nose. So it's a huge system. That's why it can feel so overwhelming to the inside of your head. There's just so much space in there that can get inflamed. Now on this slide, I just wanted to talk about some problem-specific clean slate process remedies. And lots of you hopefully heard of these before, or if you haven't, they're considerations of remedies to have at home. So these are the 3 drainage remedies. Now there's lots of lines of drainage remedies, and some of them are retailly available. These are the ones that we have available in our clinic, and a handful of pharmacies in town will carry these as well. So the top one for allergies is Pro-Aller and Iteris and Septonsil. Many of those people will have used for upper respiratory infections in the past. And in essence, what a drainage remedy is something that actually increases the flow of lymph and blood through a zone. And again, just like exercising or just like being better hydrated, it actually very specifically improves the bogginess of a tissue. So you can really take back pressure off with these and decrease the amount of reactivity. And super simple to use and to have on hand. But we're also going to talk about here a couple of things that you can get just on your own. Sorry, that didn't print out very well, but it's supposed to be say herbal help. It's a little bit hidden there. So we can also use a handful of common herbs to improve allergy symptoms. Ginger is a great and easy one. If you take enough of it, it's quite anti-inflammatory, and it can usually calm things down quite a bit. Not always by itself, but it's certainly, if you don't mind ginger, putting fresh root in hot boiling water is really useful. And then nettles. Nettles are like the stinging nettle, so the one that can hurt you if you sit in it, which I have. Stinging nettles, especially tincture of the fresh plant, works exceptionally well for allergies. You can get nettles in tablets. They're not as efficient. You have to take a fair number of them, actually. And then butterbur. Some of this you might know this as pedicides preparations. This is the one that's the most commonly used throughout Europe, and it's really considered similar in efficacy to several antihistamines in the research. So butterbur, you can get tablets of that or tincture of that. It's actually doesn't really grow very much around here. So it's not as commonly used in Western North America, but highly, highly utilized European herb. The next one is goldenrod, which sometimes people will mistakenly think that they're allergic to goldenrod, but goldenrod actually pollinates right around the time as ragweed. So if that's the case and you think you're allergic to goldenrod, it might actually be that you're allergic to ragweed. But goldenrod as a plant, historically, botanically, has been used for mitigating seasonal allergies. And it's easy to grow here. You can easily grow goldenrod and make yourself either a tincture or a tea out of that. And reishi mushroom. Reishi mushroom actually contains natural antihistamines, and it's also super adrenally supportive. So it's something that actually helps, especially if you've had a lot of mental stress and strain. So these are easy herbs that you can try. I'm going to send everybody out that participated a sheet that talks about how much of each thing to use specifically. So you don't have to worry about that too much. I'll make sure to send that along. And I see that there's some questions here at the side, and I'll get to them at the end, I promise. Thank you for putting them. If you have a question, type it right into the chat box. It's a great place for it. Now, there's also a number of essential oils that you can use for relief from allergy. And there's a couple of classic ones. Peppermint is on the top of the list. It really can clear up blocked sinuses. It kind of has this nice stimulating drainage effect, but using obviously an essential oil. So for those of you who've never used essential oils before, what that actually is a very, very concentrated oil substance coming out of the plant materials. It takes a huge volume of plant materials to actually make essential oils. They're boiled and distilled down so that you evaporate off these volatiles and concentrate them down into a liquid form. And they are very potent, so you don't usually need a lot of them. They can be inhaled or they can be ingested. Here, this is not as common, but in France, there's oral capsules of many of the essential oils used medicinally. But you don't have to be that brave. You can you can just use a little bit on a sniffer stick or a Kleenex, or put a little dot of it directly on your skin, under your nose. With most of these, that's totally possible. The odd essential oil will irritate somebody's skin, but these ones are usually pretty okay. Just don't stick them in your eye. that really burns. Lavender is also a natural antihistamine. It's really useful to reduce inflammatory allergic reactions. It's also really useful in nervy people who tend to get allergies. You can also use German chamomile oil. So this is the blue one. There's a couple of different chamomile oils, but the blue is very, very strongly anti-inflammatory. If you have some sort of like itchy red rash, if you have like a grass rash as an example, using chamomile oil diluted in some, just carrier oil like almond or olive or anything that you really have handy and apply topically to your skin is really nice at relieving that. And last but not least, there's tea tree and also lemon. So tea tree is kind of like one of those first aid ones that you can use a lot. And if you actually put it with a diffuser in the air, the volatiles in tea tree actually can really help you to bind mold and fungi and bacterial particles in the air. So it actually reduces symptoms of inhalant allergies at home and also makes you less likely to be sick. Lemon oil, like I said, classic in respiratory problems associated with allergic reactions. And if you look at this from a plant's energy signature, there's some very common anthroposophic remedies, which you may or may not have heard of, that contain lemons or other kinds of citrusy fruits like the quince, which really give you this energy signature of a strong rind that's resistant to being perturbed. So lemon oil has that signature in the essential oil as well. So hopefully that'll give you a little bit more ideas for your essential oil collection that you have. Now, a couple of homeopathics. Those of you who are homeopathic users, I thought you might like to hear the top 5 or so for allergy symptoms. So top of the pile, calibicromium. This is basically for a kind of yellowish discharge, like a gobby sneeze. Lots of sinus pressure with a loss of smell and a lot of pressure right at the root of the nose. So if you find yourself with your symptoms like pinching the top of your nose, that's a keynote of calibicromium. Natrium muriaticum, that usually has an egg white kind of discharge and sneezing, and then the nose just stops up. And you can usually have a headache with that, a right-sided headache typically. With silica allergies, there'll be little hard crusts in the nose. There's a lot of morning sneezing with no discharge, so if you get up and start sneezing right away. And a lot of the time, silica patients are a little sweaty and a little stinky if they're getting ill, even with the seasonal allergies. Allium cepa, that's actually a remedy made out of onions. And it's a great remedy for if you have your nose and your eyes dripping like you've peeled an onion and the discharge is like running down your face. Also, to people who do well with Allium sepia, also feel better in the open air, and they're worse if overheated. Pulsatilla, super useful when there's lots of sneezing. We used to have a colleague in medical school, and she would enter a room and she would throw open all the windows and she would sneeze 7 times. And it got to the point where the whole medical school class just counted the sneezes. So a pulsatilla loves having the open air. They feel better with open air. So ironically, their seasonal allergies will feel better if they go outside. And they usually have a bland, yellowish, kind of green discharge. And they can be a little bit teary if they get too ill. Thanks for watching. I love to connect with my patient community to inform and inspire, and I hope you'll join us again in the near future. See you soon.